These days, security is top of mind for everyone, and with the recent Colonial Pipeline breach, ransomware is at the top of the list for most companies. So today, we are talking security. So get ready. Hey everybody, welcome back to another FUTRtech video podcast. The audio version of the podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most of the others, or you can find it at FUTR.buzzsprout.com. Today, we're talking security with Vectra AI's CEO, Hitesh Sheth. Vectra is a leader in the threat detection and response market, and they have raised over $350 million and are definitely a unicorn and probably a decacorn. Hitesh has worked with a who's who of tech companies, from Oracle to Cisco to Aruba. So he has a lot of history in this space, and we are really excited to hear about Vectra. Welcome, Hitesh.
Chris, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hitesh, thanks so much for being on. I just wanted to before we get into the meat of all the security stuff, give me a little bit about your personal journey.
Yeah, so Chris, I think my personal journey is not that different than, say, a lot of the immigrants who have come to the U.S. and started ventures like what we do here at Vectra. Probably the only thing that's unusual, when somebody sees me, I don't think most people would realize that I'm actually from East Africa. And so, I was born in Kenya. I grew up in Kenya. And then, and I grew up on a small island off the East Coast called Mombasa. And from there, I ended up in, of all the places, Austin, Texas. And so, went and studied computer science at UT Austin. And it is one of those things where, I always wanted to do computer science. I knew that from very early on. And I also knew that, coming here to the US was the best place to come and actually build anything out of that. That's what led me to the US. And then I've been in California ever since.
Growing up in Africa and then kind of making that journey, what do you think from a perspective, what kind of perspective does that give you on being in the tech business?
Yeah, look, I think, you really come to appreciate what it takes to bootstrap something.
Yeah,
is probably the biggest thing. So it's less to do with the tech side of things and more at a personal level. I did not grow up in an affluent family, and so we have a pretty humble setup where I grew up. And so the notion of bootstrapping something from nothing, and actually probably the most important aspect of that is taking a risk.
Yeah.
In many ways, everything you do is a risk. When you have the kind of upbringing I did, everything you do is a risk.
Yeah.
Coming to this country was a giant risk. And so, and with that, and for better or for worse, not having a sense of failure or not being afraid of failure. It's like, knowing that I can just do it. And that probably was the single biggest contributor to achieving the success, apart from great education and so on and so forth. But this sense of like destiny and that you can actually pull it off was one of the gifts I got growing up where I grew up.
I think that is such an important message. I think the idea of failure, if you're not failing, you're probably not trying hard enough, right? And my kids go to a Montessori school, and one of the things they have on the wall is this is a mistake-making place. You have to have that freedom to take on, great challenges, but you can't do that if you don't have the opportunity to fail at times.
It is easily, and that sense that it's okay to try and then try again and then try again is the hallmark of this country.
Yeah.
And especially in the Valley, right?
Yes.
This is where startups come and startups flourish and startups die and you try again and you keep going, right? And this is unique to what we do in this country, which frankly, with all this noise that goes on competitive edge and so on and so forth, this is the one element here that I think is incredibly hard to replicate because it's kind of built into the culture of what we do here.
Yeah.
And that serves us really, really well.
Yeah. And I, Sandesh and I talk about this all the time, that tolerance of failure in the Valley is a particular asset for business.
Yeah. So. Right. And frankly, if there are other people here on this podcast who are either looking to start companies or are very early in their cycle of building something like this, what I say to them is, be very thoughtful about the kinds of investors you bring on board, because you want investors who don't just pay the lip service to this notion of we'll go along with you and we've got the capacity to stay with you, but who actually mean it and are willing to sort of like to use the overused term of pivot as you need to, but will stay with you to help you go through the process of building a great business.
That's a great perspective, and I think it leads us to the next question. Tell me a little bit about Vectra, and what was the problem that you guys saw in the market that needed solving?
Yeah, and my journey with the problems that we are solving now uniquely at Vectra started before Vectra.
Yeah.
And before Vectra, I was at if you look at my bio, I was at a company called Aruba.
Yeah.
And before Aruba, I ran security and switching at Juniper. And when I was at Aruba, I had a very large customer here in the Bay Area, who was also my customer at Juniper. And that customer, I had sold pretty much all your standard security products, firewalls, IDP systems, and they had a major breach back in 2010. Now, I was at Aruba by then, and when I went to see that customer in my capacity at Aruba, and I met them there, what the first thing they told me is that, look, everything you sold us back, when you are running security, it all failed. It was absolutely of no use to us when we had this major cyber event, right? And of course, I'm walking into this conversation, but this is going to go really badly now. I'm coming to talk to these people in my new capacity, and the opening line is, thank you for nothing. You sold us all that crap, and none of that worked. But when we got past that first dialogue, they were like, okay, look, all right, here's the deal. You didn't really have a prayer with the technology you sold us, because given the advanced nature of the cyber attack, right? The only way they ended up finding that was they stumbled upon it by looking at network traffic for other reasons, and they started seeing these blips in there, and they traced those blips. Ultimately, turned out to be a pretty significant event that was going on. And what they said to us was, hey, look, what can you do technically, right, to solve this in your Aruba infrastructure, right? So, and this customer was a big Aruba customer. And so 80% of their traffic ran through, if you like, the old wireless architecture for controller and access points. Mm-hmm. Can you solve this, right? Because you can see all the traffic anyway. It is the end user traffic. And now given this is circa 2010, right? AI, machine learning, none of that was in my lexicon.
Right.
All right. And so being a hardware software company with a business model that's tied to, selling hardware access points and controllers, we were like, hey, this is a clever problem. Now, if we could solve it, what could we do? Well, what does a good networking company do? Let's build a chip. So we are going to go and say, let's go build an ASIC, and we'll drop it on the controller, and it will look at network traffic at high speed, and it'll find blips, and maybe you can add some value from a security point of view. Well, while there was a good, let's just call it a traditional way of solving it. Yeah. Ultimately, we realized that it was going to be very cost prohibitive to the business model of the company at that time. ASICs are expensive. By the time you put them on the board, it changes the COGS of your product. It changes the margin of what you're selling. And so while it was a good idea from one customer, it did not seem like a big enough problem to solve that we had to go and change our business at that time. So, and again, no conversation about AI. So took that and parked that aside. Yeah. Fast forward a couple of years later, and wanted to go and do something in security, build a company from scratch. And the bug of security was in my brain ever since I ran that at Juniper. Sorry. Yeah. And so and by then, 2012, the notion of large scale attacks was becoming more prevalent in the market, right? And it seemed like, okay, there's something forming here where if you could uniquely solve it, you could add value to the enterprise market. And this is when the notion of AI first started coming to bear, right? And so three things had to be trending correctly, technically. if you had a shot at solving this. One, AI itself had to have advanced. By the way, AI, when I did computer science, was the domain that everybody did and felt like you're never going to have a career in it. This is when I was doing computer science at UT. Nobody touched AI. Only the experimental researchy stuff, right? And so that was all like the stigma that it had. But by the time 2012 came around, AI itself had advanced enough. Number one. Number two, the cost of storage had to be dropping.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of compute, number three, had to be dropping, because these three things had to come together for us to produce any kind of platform at the right price point that you can solve problems for the customer. And those trend lines were clear in 2012. Then it came down to, okay, which investors can you partner with to actually go and solve a problem like this, right? And frankly, in 2012, AI was still very, science experimenty. Most people are like, don't touch this. And most people here on Sand Hill, when I spoke to them about it, their general theme was, hey, look, sounds good, but it sounds super high beta. Don't do this. Like, do something else, but don't do this, right? And you generally need one or two investors who are really going to lean in with you and partner with you on this.
Yeah.
Right. In our case, we're really fortunate to have two. Right. One was IA Ventures out of New York, and then the person probably who has been seminal from that time and has been working very closely with us even till today was Vinod Khosla Ventures. And and Vinod has done amazing things from the founding of Sun Microsystems a while back now, to an early investor in Google, helped jumpstart Juniper, early investor in Amazon, right? So he does large bets, and he was a thematic believer in AI.
Yeah.
And so sitting with him and the folks at IA Ventures, I felt like, okay, they are the right kind of partners to work with to go and kickstart this. And so myself and a couple of like four of us, we started this out on an empty floor here in San Jose, and the rest is history, so to speak.
That's awesome. And you're playing with some heavy hitters there for sure.
Yeah. And not just that, but I think more importantly, right, they were willing to go along.
Yeah.
Right. And that is so important when you start something, right? And because these things are never a straight line.
Yeah.
And anybody who says that I'd all figured out on day one is actually full of crap. These things are super hard to pull off, and failure is something you deal with at every step of the way.
Yeah.
And having patient investors who can give you good guidance along the way, and be good advisors for you is critical to success. And I've been fortunate to have great people around the table.
Yeah. Well, I know Sandesh and I, we were talking to a lot of the folks on Sand Hill Road, back, even 3-4 years ago. And there was like kind of a real urgency to get into AI ML space. But that was, I felt like that was fairly short lived, because I think they ran into this huge enablement gap where there just wasn't enough really good people to do that kind of work to really transform those companies. So I think they kind of got a little spooked on that, and that.
Well, I think there's a when you're building anything around AI, there are a couple of things that are really critical, right? People often make the mistake thinking that you can build generalized AI systems,
Yeah.
and frankly, the closest thing to generalized AI is you, Chris, Sandesh, and me.
Right.
The three of us are the closest thing to generalized AI. It doesn't work in the real world, right? Applied AI does work.
Yeah.
And there's a method to building applied AI systems that if you don't have, and I say this from experience, because when we started out, we were going to build a generalized AI system. And, for the first couple of years, frankly, we stumbled around in the wilderness, trying to get something to work. And it's only through failure, again, that we came to realize that, okay, you know what, this general concept of, hey, let's take things like neural networks and apply it to a whole bunch of data, and you're going to get magical results. You definitely get, amazing, good-looking graphics, but the results are absolutely garbage.
Yeah.
And until you kind of go, wow, I need to marry this thing with the domain that I'm solving it for. So in this case, security, right? So if I'm going to apply AI here, I better have the right security domain at the table. If I'm doing something in healthcare, I better have the right healthcare domain at the table, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that's a really tricky challenge, because one of the problems with AI is it's very opaque, right? So understanding how good of a job it's doing is sometimes a hard value proposition to communicate, and I guess the proof is in the pudding. When your AI is functioning very successfully, that's where you've got to win it.
In the security context, like for what we do, right? The efficacy of the system is pretty clear. Once it's in the hands of the analyst, right? Am I getting the right signal to noise ratio?
Right.
That's like probably the most important thing. And if that signal to noise ratio is achieved with minimal effort, then AI is doing its job.
Yeah.
Right. If it's achieved with minimal intervention on the part of the user and or the software provider, then it's doing its job. Right. And if it's not, then the opposite is true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, security is a really hard problem to solve, because I think, as you sort of pointed out earlier, you're defending against something you're not even sure about. It's the universe of all possible attacks, and you've got advanced persistent threats that take all kinds of complex approaches to targeting you, and it's a really hard problem to solve. And I think we're really in a place in the world right now where we're seeing the effects of that. From the SolarWinds breach to now just massive ransomware, challenges. The Colonial Pipeline, just recently was a really, really big piece of that. We get asked by clients all the time, what do we do about, ransomware? What's your take on how to approach that problem?
Right. So a few points around this, right? First and foremost, and this is really core, you've got to take I'm going to get breached mentality to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And this is really key because, frankly, we saw this in the first few years of selling, right? We walk into a customer and it was not unusual for us to get this very common pushback, which is, no, I can prevent attacks from happening, right? And you're smiling,
yeah.
But that literally was the mindset that existed, because, frankly, that's what vendors sold as well.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at traditional security, come back to the example I gave you when for this company that I was mentioning when I was at Aruba, what did I sell them? I sold them firewalls. What are firewalls designed for? Well, there is designed to stop things and filter things at the edge of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that's been the dominant mindset in the industry, that I can actually stop things from happening. And you've got to break that mindset first and foremost, right? If you're really going to go and solve this holistically, right? And so that, I think today, it's a rare customer now that if you go and speak to, the CISO, he or she is going to tell you that, no, you know what? I can actually stop all advanced attacks. Okay, I think that's gone. Okay, good news. Great. Right. The second thing is recognizing that, you've got to segment how you solve dealing with attacks into, I would just broadly say, two buckets, right? You got to solve things at the endpoint. Okay. And there are companies who do this really well.
Yeah.
Then you got to think of the infrastructure that the endpoints connect to, and you got to solve it there too. Now, in this world that we've been living in the last 12, 18 months, in particular with the pandemic, it has never been truer, because we are all mobile, we are somewhere, and we all have devices that we utilize. But those devices ultimately connect up to something in the cloud or in the data center.
Yeah. And
if you're going to solve this problem of attack surface, right, you got to solve it on both sides. And that is really, really key. And if you can take that mindset and then think about the technology you utilize, right, then you can segment the problem set and say, what do I do to solve the endpoint problem? What do I solve the problem on the infrastructure side?
Yeah.
That would be sort of like the guiding principle, first and foremost, before we talk about which vendor is good or not good, which platform is good or not good. That's the way to tackle the problem at the highest level.
The attack surface is, spread out across, the cloud, and you've got a lot of, containerized instances and things like that are spinning up and shutting down, and not persistent, and you've got all sorts of networks that have to allow a lot of connectivity, east-west traffic that in a traditional architecture you wouldn't have had anymore. So it's a really big challenge now, right?
It is, and I'll tie it back to the Colonial, the ransomware attack that you mentioned earlier. What we are facing with the cloud in particular is unprecedented in terms of attack surface growth, right? And we are frankly at the very early stages of what this is going to look like, right? I mean, I think if you look at it in terms of security maturity, this is like circa Windows 95.
That's
right?
scary.
That's frightening at many levels, because that was at least a contained problem set on one desktop machine. Okay, albeit millions of them, but at least it was nothing as amorphous as cloud infrastructure, and we are at the very, very early cycle of adoption of cloud services.
Yeah.
Right. And so take that Windows 95 reference, multiply that 1,000 times and plus, and that's what we're dealing with when it comes to cloud security. Right. Yeah. And now, in the face of that, right, you still have, I would say old school kind of like technologies are getting utilized, right? And the thing that should worry all of us is that the people who are actually attacking our infrastructure, whether it's organized hackers, nation state, they will utilize advanced techniques well before the people who defend against such attacks.
Yeah.
Right. So, two examples, right? People talk about GPUs, right? As like, hey, next stage in advanced compute kind of capability. Well, hackers have been using GPUs for quite some time.
Yeah.
Quite some time.
Yeah.
AI. We talk about using AI. Well, hackers have been using AI for quite some time. Right. And so if there are customers listening to this and they're going to ask me like, okay, if I'm looking at different technology elements, right, what is the one thing I should gravitate to that I can make core to my strategy? 1,000%, you have to utilize AI. I'm not here to pitch, hey, use us, right? Because, okay, fine. Yes, I'd love for you to use Vectra. What I'd say to any customer listening to this, right, we, on the people who are trying to defend ourselves, ultimately do not have a prayer with the volume and the diversity of attacks that we are facing, right? This is well beyond what any set of humans can actually realistically solve for.
Yeah.
Or from a software point of view, anything that is like generic heuristic-based systems, right? Which is really what a lot of security technology tends to be, which is, hey, if I have problem A, I've got a solution for A, and then I'll solve it with A. If it's B, I'll solve it with B. Right? Whereas this is changing so fast all the time. And the only way you can really do that is that at the heart of your strategy, you've got to embrace AI. You really do.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple pieces to that, right? One is that, one of the conversations we're constantly having with people is that they cannot find enough talented security people. It's
Correct.
Nearly impossible. And outside of the context of a security company, to attract that talent into a company is really, really difficult, right? And the other piece of it is that this stuff happens so fast that to respond to things, a human just can't do it, right? It's just not possible.
Cannot. And not only a human cannot do it, one single platform cannot do it either.
Right.
So let's take the Colonial hack as an example, right? Here's the thing. As much havoc as it caused, would you believe me if I told you it was really not that unique?
I would, actually.
Right? But if you do, that should you have to ask ourselves like, okay, if it's not that unique, why on earth couldn't we stop it?
Yeah.
Right? And the reason is, at the end of the day, these systems, these kind of ransomware attacks, are going to evade your traditional approaches or a single layer strategy approach, right? That's the way to think about security. So in the Colonial hack, right? Customer has this thing was able to evade your traditional endpoint systems. It's not unusual for run-of-the-mill malware, right, or ransomware to kind of go, hey, how do I evade this agent you've deployed on your laptop or your phone? That's child's play all day long.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what do? Well, absolutely, you should try and stop it at the endpoint if you can.
Yeah.
If you can. But the point I was making earlier, it's going to land on the other side in the infrastructure. And you better have mechanisms in place in the infrastructure that can identify these attacks as they're unfolding. And the thing about the infrastructure that is unique compared to, say, the endpoint is the following. When you look at the endpoint, right, it's mathematically, it's an n-by-n permutational opportunity for the hacker.
Mm-hmm.
You have endless ways of breaking in.
Yeah.
Endless. However, when you're on the other side and when you get into the infrastructure, so I'll get a little geeky now. Okay, when you're looking at the network, all right?
Yeah.
Anybody who's sort of like sort of like understands networking stacks, there are 7 layers in the networking stack. That's it. It's been 7 layers for a super long time, and it's always going to be 7 layers. There is no 8th layer. So in other words, when the attack moves onto the network, right, it is now a confined problem set. It's a fixed problem set. It has to work within the 7 layers. So you can, again, mathematically, you can go and constrain the problem to identify what the attack is likely going to do in that environment, what behaviors it's likely going to exhibit, right? So if you're solving this, you got to solve it both on the endpoint side, but for heaven's sake, go and solve it on the other end too, where it's actually a problem you can put your arms around.
Right.
And the truth is, if the pipeline company had put systems in place on the other side, there would not be a headline today.
Yeah. Well,
this I guarantee you, there would not have been a headline.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at the end of the day, they paid the ransom. They restored from backup, but that took a really long time. And I mean, it caused an incredible amount of disruption to the point where we've got, people blowing themselves up trying to drive around with gas and, plastic bags, which is insane.
That is correct.
So it's if you are, one of the biggest remediation steps for ransomware is to restore from backup, right? But if you're there, you've already got a much bigger problem, right? Because 1, it could take you a really long time to get out of that. 2, your data has probably been exfiltrated and could be used against you, right? Even after you pay the ransom.
Right.
And 3, when I talk to a lot of security professionals, they're saying, ransomware attacks are actually to cover other nefarious activities that are going on in the network as well. So if that's what you're focused on, you're not seeing all this other stuff that's going on.
That is correct. That is correct. And it's frankly, the dark side group that executed this attack, it was unusual in being repentant almost.
Yes, I saw that.
Like,
sorry.
We didn't really mean it to be this bad. Like, good Lord, like that was not the intent. Well, that they are unusual. Like majority of the time, that is not. No, the intent is malicious.
Yeah.
Right. And the point you made is actually a really good one. It can be a distraction. To the real cause. Right. And in this case, you could restore things with backup and you pay, it was a few $1 million. And so not good. But if the intent is to cause damage and shut systems down, et cetera, then you're in a world of hurt. So if this thing that occurred with Colonial Pipeline, in a way should be, if SolarWinds was not a wake-up call, this should be a monstrous wake-up call, because the next time, right, the intent is not just to, hey, let me just freeze you and collect a little bit of money from you, but let me actually affect your national grid.
Yes.
Right. And so if you are a nation state that is watching this from afar, think of it this way, and you just saw this, that looks like another organized kind of hacking unit went and caused this much damage with ease, mind you, and then you see SolarWinds and you see that it occurred with ease. It was able to get into our federal systems. Think of what is possible from their standpoint. Like if somebody wants to hurt us here, right? This just gives them confidence that if they want to come in, right, they can act with impunity, which frankly they could, given the way some of these systems are built.
Well, and it's a huge economy too. I mean, this is big business, ransomware, right? I mean,
it is. It is.
And if that's not incentive enough, right, to keep going. I mean, the fact that they keep constantly getting paid, and I've heard some companies talk about, well, we're just going to issue a statement that we will never pay a ransom to, just kind of ward these people off. Because one of the other problems is if you get hit with a ransomware, you're probably 100% chance of getting hit again.
Again,
right?
You bet.
Because you paid, 100%.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. You paid once, you're likely going to pay again. This is very, very true. Right? There was a tragicomedy statement I read somewhere the other day around ransomware, it being like the perfect business model.
Yeah.
It's high growth, high margin, right? If it could be legitimate, right? You could actually build a business and, the stock price would be like pretty good around it, right? But that is it just goes to show you the durability of that model and the fact that that's generally true. And so, this is not going to stop. I mean, this is just not going to stop.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it really comes down to then what are we going to do about it? Right.
Yeah. And and a lot of these people are outside of the jurisdiction of any country that will, extradite people or even investigate some of these crimes. And, all this money supports local economies. So, they do see the benefit of it. And the thing that I think is really interesting too is, we saw, this is not just, small time, kids in their basement, mother's basement doing this stuff. This is nation states and that sort of thing. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is what we're seeing is it used to be just, a specific set of companies, tech companies and financial companies, services companies and things like that, and governmental companies that they went after. But now it seems like they're really widening the net. I mean, we saw like with SolarWinds and things like that, we saw all sorts of healthcare companies in that too. So it's there's such a rich attack surface out there for these folks.
It is.
There's just unlimited growth potential, like you said here. So
yes, sadly, that's actually very true.
Yeah, and I don't think enough companies are really taking this seriously. And you see the rise of cyber insurance and things like that. It's like, well, I'll just mitigate my risk by just buying some insurance. Well, I mean, it's good to have that, I suppose, but that's not a good strategy.
Yeah, I would say I think there are, if you were to go and speak to the security teams inside the enterprise, I think there's a very strong sense of urgency around this topic. I think there's a sense of like, I think I know what I need to do if I could get the right support to go solve it around it. I mean, to the point you made earlier, there are not enough people to go solve it.
Yeah.
Right. I would say, for boards of the large enterprise, there's a role for them to play here in providing the right kind of support for the security teams. Right. The interesting thing is today in the large, if you look at IT topics, there's only one topic that really kind of makes it to the board level, and that is security. Right. And specifically, it's around cyber attacks. That's the one topic that gets there.
Yep.
But I am, from at least from the experience I've had, the dialogue that occurs between, the security team and the board tends to be, I would say not rich enough. And that frankly, it's not uncommon that, we hear this directly. The board is not educated enough. How do we present data and reports in a way that they can consume it easily? Well, there is an answer to this, right? Which is it's not going to be reasonable to expect every board member to become an expert in cybersecurity.
Right.
Fine. But on every board, you could have somebody who is an expert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that can go a long way to create the right degree of awareness inside the enterprise. But starting at the board level, there's a governance aspect here that is really going to be critical. That we saw, like, in any board will have an audit function, right? If you're a public company, you have an audit function. You will always say, you know what, I need to have somebody who's like a CFO on the board because they can provide governance expertise when it comes to the finance operation of the company. Well, I think we are at a point now in cybersecurity that, frankly, you need to have an equivalent audit function led by somebody who lives and breathes this thing, right? And I think that, as kind of like processes that may sound, but if you're going to create long-term solutions, right, from a technology point of view, okay, go embrace AI. All right, great. From a governance point of view, solve this at the board level by actually putting real expertise at the board who can guide the conversation at the board level and then the implementation thereof.
That is such a great perspective on it. You're so right on that. Like not having that capacity on the board is really critical, because I think we all know that like the best time to sell a security product is right after a security event, right? And the problem is the attention span is just really short. And like at the beginning they're like, well, do whatever it takes to fix this problem, right? You got about a week of that. And then after that, it's like, well, it's kind of getting expensive. And then we can't afford that, right?
That's correct.
You need that guy who can have that longer term perspective.
That's correct. That's correct. And frankly, when you look at security teams and you look at the budgets that they get to deal with, and then with the constraints that get placed on them, we're talking a lot. I'm talking about what they should do. Let's talk a little bit about what they could probably not do as well, right? Or things they should, in a way to think about spending money, what they can potentially shoot along the way, right? For example, right? I'll go back to what I sold, when I was running security at Juniper. We would sell the systems called IDPs, intrusion detection systems. Yeah. All right. Or intrusion prevention systems.
Yeah.
In this day and age, and by the way, there's still like, $1 billion worth of spend, a couple of $1 billion worth of spend that goes on in the market right now.
Yeah.
That entire category should be shot in its entirety. It's based on like super legacy methodology called signatures, which is if I've seen something, I'll give you an answer back. And that is good when attacks did not change, or there were once, like maybe in a couple of years, you got hit by something really significant, right? That just does not work. So if I'm talking again, if you're a customer, right? If there's a CFO here listening to you, this conversation, if I'm getting this bill that I have to look at, this spend, IDP systems, you really, I'm not to be provocative, but you really have to kind of sit there and kind of go, what value am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, what value? Right. And, you could, if you want to be a little bit draconian, I don't even think it's draconian. I think it's actually the right thing. Strike it. Just strike it. You're not going to be any less safe, guaranteed. Mm-hmm. Right. That's number one. Here's probably the more controversial question to ask. What do you need a firewall for? Okay. Now, any CIO, just a networking person could look at me like, what, are you crazy? Of course you need firewalls. Yes, there's a role for firewalls. Right. I accept that. It is not the role that's been sold in the last couple of decades, which is I'm going to come and save you because I can stop things all the time. It is not going to happen. But think about how much money gets spent on firewalls. Okay. And, there's a whole commodity aspect that has occurred in the last several years that you could take a chunk of spend out of that and divert it to other areas where it's going to be relevant to solve the problems you're running into today and what you're going to run into in the future, which is advanced cyber attacks. Yeah. The firewall is not designed to help you deal with advanced cyber attacks. Period. End of story. Yeah. Right. So there's this part of this narrative in the conversation here around not just what you're going to do, but what you're going to stop doing or doing less of that is really critical if you're going to solve this thing correctly.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing about it too, to keep in mind for everybody is that, if you have an outage, in your data center, you have a bad day. But if you have a security breach, that could be an existential event. And what is that value to you?
Mm-hmm. Correct. That is correct. Yes, your service going down for a day or two is terrible enough. Your reputation going and your customers' data leaving and them getting exposed that could be the end of the company.
Yeah, I mean, look at Colonial Pipeline. I mean, that was a really big reputational hit there.
That's correct. By the way, ask them if anybody were to talk to them and say, "Hey, which firewall helped you in this scenario?" Or the SolarWinds. Everyone who got hit by SolarWinds. Which firewall did you utilize that saved your neck?
Yeah. Well, and the SolarWinds attack is still out there. I mean, people think like, oh, well, that happened and that's done. I mean, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop on that one, right?
It is. It is. It is. It is one of the more insidious attacks that have taken place because the thing that was now in this case, while the technique was not clever, the effect was actually pretty clever because it is one of the few systems that actually touched and managed infrastructure, networking, routers, switches, servers, and so once you have touched those systems, what are you going to do? I mean, if your one option is to rip and replace all of that, you're not going to be able to afford that. So there's stuff that's sitting out there. To the point you're making, Chris, we have no idea.
Right.
We have no idea. I mean, this could go on for the next couple of years and trickle out, and that's how we're going to find out that yes, there's this lasting impact of SolarWinds.
Yeah, and the recommendation from CISA was you really basically have to rebuild your infrastructure and sort of forensically migrate from one to the other to know you're clean. And we do know some companies out there that are actually doing that.
Yeah.
But that's a tall ask for a lot of companies.
It is an impossible and an unreasonable ask, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's but again, coming back to that's a remediation suggestion. What is the suggestion for how you can actually solve something in the future?
Right.
I'll come back to one more time. If you've got the right platform, and I don't mean to be redundant, but you've got to have AI that is staring at your systems and picking up behaviors and is focused on picking up behaviors that tells you they've been compromised. That's your fastest way of getting ahead of an attack. You can never stop one, but you can get ahead of that before you become a headline. And This is the only durable way of actually solving it, ultimately.
Yeah, rapid detection and remediation is key, and the only way to do that is AI because you're battling an AI half the time.
That's correct. That's correct. Absolutely correct.
The war has begun. You got to get your people in place.
Yes. And it's asymmetric.
It is. It's
asymmetric today.
You may have 10 smart people in your company that really, really know security well, but they're not smarter than 10,000 attackers coming at you, right? Correct. That collective effort and collective intelligence is always going to overwhelm you.
That is correct.
How does your product work to solve for this problem?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I'll come back to what I was saying earlier, which is you've got to break this into two parts. You've got technologies that solve the endpoint, the devices, right? Your phones, your laptops, etc., right? Yeah. And then you've got technologies that focus on infrastructure, what those devices connect to.
Yeah.
We focus on the latter. We are all about the cloud and data center. And the trick the key to what we do is collecting data from these disparate areas. So whether, we certainly look at the network. Okay. So, if to use Gartner terminology, we would address NDR, which is network detect and response. The endpoint people are endpoint detect and response. Or the other thing that Gartner or some of the people talk about is something known as XDR, which is extended detection response.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But that's vendor speak and that's analyst speak. From the customer point of view, it's really solve this problem for me in the cloud and data center. That's what they care about. And then SaaS applications, right? So what we do is we will collect data from whether it is in the cloud, whether it's infrastructure as a service, so that's network data. Whether you look at something like platform as a service, and in that case, we'll look at whether it's API calls, logs, SaaS, similarly, API calls, logs. And we are, in that sense, agnostic to where we get the data from. But the trick here is, how do you then apply AI to look for the signal in that haystack?
Okay.
Right. And so we if there's one thing we do uniquely well, it's exactly that, which is we will take AI and apply it to any data set we get our hands on and help find that signal that tells you you've been compromised, and then give you the mechanism to then remediate based on the signal that we discover. That's what we do. We do that for the data center. We do that for data center networks. We do that for cloud. We do that for things like Office 365 when you look at things like SaaS applications. And that's the unique value add we bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine you guys have some really interesting stories about things you've seen out in the world there. And really,
we do. We lots of them, right? There was and I'm saying something that's actually out publicly now, right? We had a customer, a large pharmaceutical customer of ours, and they had a major cyber event late last year, and then the way this event unfolded is actually a telling story of what happens every day in the enterprise. It was basically a social media event. So here's what happened, right? I'm the hacker. You are the employee at this pharmaceutical company. And what I'm going to do is impersonate somebody else and say, hey, Chris, I've got a better job proposition for you because this guy Sandesh is not paying you well.
No,
Or,
he's not.
So, right? He's not. Yeah. Right. And so, I've got a better deal for you. And let's start talking about, and I do this with you over LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm impersonating another company. I'm a recruiter and I find a way to convince you to start talking to me. And we connect and it's you plus, 1,000 of your friends at this company. Somebody's going to bite. Yeah. Right. And let's just imagine for a second, you were the one who decided, you know what? I actually want to have a dialogue with you. So we exchange stuff on LinkedIn. And from there, we kind of go, hey, look, it's not safe to talk on LinkedIn because it's open. We should have an encrypted conversation. So why don't we use WhatsApp and have an encrypted chat discussion, right? So you're on a company device. You've now cut over to something like WhatsApp. And I'm sharing, now I'm like, hey, I've got a job description for you. I'm going to email it to you.
Oh, boy.
Right? I'm going to share it to you over WhatsApp. And it comes to you over an encrypted tunnel, right? Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Because you trust me, you're going to take this document. And of course, the document's infected.
Sure.
Right? It lands on your device. It is smart enough because, hey, I can evade your endpoint agents all day long. It's going to evade anything you got on the endpoint. But then here's the killer. Not only did I share this with you over an encrypted communication with you, from your device to the data center or the cloud, you also have an encrypted tunnel back. Because encryption is our friend. It's supposed to make us more secure.
Until it doesn't.
Sure. But it's also the perfect way to hide an advanced attack.
Yeah.
And from your device to the data center, you've given the malware, right, a clear shot at getting there. We see this kind of stuff happening all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Right? Because despite, this is the thing I was saying, at the front end of the attack surface, it's an end-by-end permutational problem set.
Yeah.
The opportunities are endless, right? If it's not WhatsApp, you're going to use something else. It'll be some other app you're going to utilize that will find a way. If I'm determined, I can get to you.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we see. And then, it's what you do on the other side of the chain here that is going to determine whether you can stop this or not.
People are the problem. We just got to, I think you got to take AI to that next level where they just become the employees and we get rid of the people.
Well, that's my, that's what my question is, Hitesh. You've talked about the complexity of these hacks. You've talked about the lack of education from a customer perspective. You've talked about, developing AI because now we need technology to enable to solve this problem. You've explained so many dynamics of the problem, right? Of us actually being able to solve it. What is, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge? Is it the fact that they're just so complicated? Is it the technology's not there enough? Is the education not there enough? What would be the one thing that you would hang your hat on to say this is the big challenge that we need to fix?
I think the probably the biggest thing I see right now around, I think we are not well past. I think we are moving past the point where people are dubious about AI or not AI. I mean, there was a lot of that in a few years ago around, hey, this is, everybody says AI, this is a black box thing. Who knows if it works or not? I don't really believe in it, right? We have seen this.
People watch too many Terminator movies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. We have seen this transformation in the market where there's a broad acceptance. I think where we are now today is, hey, I got to use something intelligent. I'm going to solve it in the endpoint. Because there's still this thing of like, if I get it there, then I can actually stop it or I can contain it there. The next step, and that we are also seeing a transformation, is that is only one half of the coin. It's the other side I got to solve for too. And if I do that in tandem, then that's my best shot at actually containing advanced attacks. So if I'm going to hang my hat on one thing and one thing only, right? Yes, solve it on this side. but for heaven's sake, solving the other side too.
Yeah.
Those two things go together.
Yeah. So being a security startup, what is the Chris has made me very nervous about security folks. You know, they used to report to him stuff, so he's told me how challenging they can be and just negative, and because they're always trying to think of the bad situation that could happen and then try to save for that. So how does that transition to a culture within a startup? Like, how would you describe the culture of your organization?
Well, so I would say if you look at Vectra, I mean, there are two things here, right? There's security is core to what we do, and at the end of the day, there are three elements that describe culturally who we are, right? And the three I'm about to tell you has nothing to do with security whatsoever. Right, we are the very first thing. There are only three things in our value system. Three things. One, we are maniacal about customers. It's a very easy thing to say, but we are. And the key to being maniacal about customers is having genuine empathy for customers. When you're a young company, right? So we are 400 plus people now. So we have kind of graduated from security to now a young company moving forward, right? But the thing we have got to always remember is that a customer is taking a chance on us every single time, right? They can always have safe choices, whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. You don't have to explain this to your CFO like I bought Cisco, right? There was a time when Cisco used to say IBM, right? So now they're like the IBM. Yeah. Okay. But they're taking a chance to do. So you've got to be maniacal focused on their success and genuinely care about the success. That's number one. Number two, to build, having a shot at building a successful business, right? There's a second thing we talk about all the time, which is no drama teamwork. And those very plain, direct words. And it actually starts with the executive team every single time.
Yeah.
Right, companies gonna do this thing of like, hey, let's have great teamwork and let's do X, Y, and Z. They're really talking about everybody else in the company but the executive team. No.
Right.
Start with the executive team, and that's going to do. But no drama teamwork. Pretty simple.
Right.
Third is integrity. Right. That's it. Every new batch of folks that join the company, when I sit down and meet them for the first time, right, we talk about the value system of Vectra, and these are the three things we care about. And I always tell them, like, in a joke, man, I say, look, here's the operating assumption. You're all, all smart. You're all hardworking, right? And I know you're all good looking, obviously, right?
The security folks.
Clearly, right? But these are the three things we care about.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that your first one is really, really important. Chris and I talk about this all the time because sometimes you can start to believe in your own BS, and what really matters is the customer. And so nothing else matters but what the customer thinks. And if your customer feels like this solution is solving this problem, then pay attention to that and make sure you understand the problem you're solving for. But if they also say, I don't have that problem, or it's not solving the problem that I need, that kind of feedback can change the entire company.
Every company's best laid plans always, right, change at the moment of contact with the customers.
Right.
Every single time. That's a truism in every business. It is 100% true in security. Yeah. But the key to what you just said there, Sandesh, is you've got to be willing to be close to the customer and have a dialogue with the customer on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Right. Even through the pandemic, right? I think, people inside Vectra know this. In Q4, calendar Q4 last year, right? Our head of products, Kevin Kennedy, and I, we went and spent time with 100 customers. We're like, okay, I can't travel everywhere, but we can do this virtually all day long.
Yeah.
And we over a period of 3 months connected with 100 customers.
Wow.
And it was the best use of time.
Yes.
Any day.
Yeah.
Any single day. Yeah. Right. We learned a lot. They liked a lot of what we're doing. They also crapped on us for things that we should be doing better on. Sure. Right. As they should. But hey, you know what? You don't have the dialogue. You just don't know.
Right.
Yeah. That's a great perspective. That really is. So tell me what's next for Vectra.
I think what is next for us, honestly, I would boil it down to this. Like we are laser focused on being the vendor that provides coverage for detection and response for cloud and data center and SaaS apps. That's it. That's what we are focused on, right? And so everything we're doing inside the company is geared towards making sure that our platform is in service of that mission.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, as you've probably seen in the news, we just raised, a chunk of money, and we are really fortunate to have Blackstone come to the table as a partner.
Yeah.
And normally when people raise, any kind of money at this stage, right? Forget the unicorn valuation, all this stuff. That's great. That's all good. But what are you going to do with this capital, right? And a common thing use of capital for companies is I'm going to go and pour it into sales and marketing because I'm just going to go and try and grow, right? And go and get more revenue. Yes, you should do a little bit of that. For us, the number one objective is to invest in R&D. So we are aggressively expanding our R&D footprint first and foremost because, again, there's a we talked about cloud being this exponential problem set that's just unfolding in front of us. Well, it's going to take the right kind of platform building and investment to go and address that, and that's where we're going to focus our energy.
Yeah, that's great to hear because I think you're in a space that's just constantly evolving, and the only thing you can do is constantly learn, develop, and grow. Right? I mean, that's critical for your business. Critical for your business.
R&D. It's a at the end of the day, if you look at the history of technology companies, the ones that ultimately win out are the ones that invested in R&D. Heavily and disproportionately. Yeah. Right. Those are the ones that win, and that's what we intend to be.
Hitesh, wow, you gave us a ton of great information here. You sound like you've got a really cool, innovative company. You're definitely an interesting and dynamic leader, and I really appreciate all the wisdom that you've brought to us here, and thank you so much for being on.
Hey, Chris and Sandesh, thank you both very, very much for giving me the opportunity. It was a great conversation. Hopefully, some useful tidbits for the audience here that they can utilize as well, and I'm grateful. Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
You. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click on that like button, hit that subscribe button. That helps the channel a ton. And if you want to get notified when we post new content, click on that bell icon and you will get notified. And I will see you in the next video.